Hello, Ivy here. This week's podcast is entitled Brand UK, Dysfunctionality, Government and Monarchy, Episode 85. An introduction. The UK appears to be caught up in a type of whirlwind, a whirlwind manufactured and developed within the UK, to a point many, if not most of us, wake up, each assuming we managed to get a good sleep in the first place, wondering what meteor is going to strike us today, and what contingency plans can we start to think about now that may come in handy during the day if another metaphorical meteor strikes it today. That is how many of us are living. The mental health issues stacking up in this country is going to take many decades of professional interventions to even scrape the surface of the issues in play, and even more books written on the lessons learned each time we go up a gear in mental and physical suffering. Each of the top societal groups are the cause of these whirlwinds, and their attempt at hiding their mistakes and gaslighting the general public about what we can all do. Because, as you know, we are all in this together. Yeah, right. So, we all are told to go off somewhere and find ways to block the metaphorical meteors from landing on our homes and workplaces. And then we find, actually, it is the freezing temperatures occurring out of season, and our inability to keep ourselves warm is the latest crisis, because costs have doubled and trebled and whatever comes next in the sequence. Most of us do not even know what comes next, because we are focused on getting through today. The societal groups responsible for the Lord of the Flies reenactment across Plantation Island, known as the UK, are government, monarchy, aristocracy, police, media, both printed and televised, and their owners, who all live outside of the UK, and elements of the judiciary, but who have systems and processes in place which harm a large section of the population, but none of them really care about our plight. Their priority is to feed us bilge and sound convincing, whilst all the time there are deals and contracts being put together for personal gain in a variety of ways. From my own observations over the last decade, there seems to be growing reduction in the confidence of any of those groups mentioned, and as a result, the state of society and the behaviours within it stoke the situation to become worse by the day. The days when those pillars of society were respected, even if not liked, or their policies were not what we wanted to experience, the respect was there. The belief that the people involved had the best of intentions is waning now. Confidence is also falling. My personal feelings about what I have seen in the politicians, both in government or in opposition, along with the royal family, is such now that I don't have any faith whatsoever in either of the two lead groups, and their partners in crime are all the ones listed above. I look at them like a cartel. They discuss among themselves strategies and then actions which they can implement whilst persuading people that it is for their good, and it is all legal, and where there are queries, they plan to redraft laws for the UK that will enable us to go even faster to the land of Utopia and surrounding uninhabited fauna without challenge. The reality is, wherever Utopia apparently exists, in our mind or any physical place that we operate outside of the norm, it will be sold to us as the mecca of all ambitions. In the real world, it will all be cosmetic or a mirage. Our lives and struggles will continue, and it will be sold to us that suffering now will create abundance later. Austerity will be the equivalent of character building. Meanwhile, none of the senior people in any of these societal groups will be working or travelling to any kind of utopia. Their feet will be firmly on the ground, and the only people who will not be feeling the pressures of cost of living crises will be the government ministers, opposition ministers, news and TV media owners, senior police groups, and legal bodies. All will be more profitable as a result of the cost of living crisis, and they won't be living in utopia in their heads. This mass mind control of persuading people to build character by suffering now, and one's country will ultimately spring back from this, and all will be well, is a fallacy. It will take decades to even begin to see improvements. Meanwhile, all those responsible for the suffering and hardship either won't be here anymore, or will be spending their last days of retirement in some place that is not the UK, and their bank accounts will look very healthy for generations of their families to come. The fact of the matter is, those groups are losing the confidence of the people, and we are deliberately held back from doing anything about it. Even the right to protest is being restrained. Likewise, the holding up of placards without any vocal input is enough to get people moved from view. Government know if elections are held, they are likely to lose. So their system is to keep building and then tearing down the latest Prime Minister, and then choose another, and rinse and repeat the process. So, for the last 12 years, the UK has had 5 Prime Ministers, without any input from the people of this nation. Each time, one of their clusters of comedic policy packages is seen for what they really are, the media jump in and do their daily character assassination of who the top people in those societal groups want to be rid of. And the same press writes stories with provocative headlines to ensure the fall from grace of one person and to falsely praise a newcomer. The voting process of the new leader is a mirage, a game played to look like things are above board, but in reality, the winner is picked from very early on in this process. And people who are elected officials are encouraged as to who should have their vote. As long as sufficient ambitious politicians without integrity willing to vote, the questionable process continues. This podcast will focus on government and monarchy, particularly monarchy, and show how the dysfunctionality impacts on the UK economically and the damage done to the process of trying to form business deals and partnerships with other nations. Government and monarchy work hand in hand, not in full view, and each helps the other to stay in place. A quid pro quo arrangement. Very similar to aspects of the invisible contract between the British royal family and the tabloid media. The target for distraction purposes in the invisible contract was the first person of colour to join the royal family. On the face of things, Meghan was welcomed into the fold, and officially the British royal family was going to be inclusive and more approachable to wider sections of the communities around the world. The reality was far from that, and the business model developed and funded by powerful people in both groups will remain as a major travesty in global history, and only UK publications of any kind will be reporting otherwise. The world, however, slowly began to sit up and take notice of what was happening, and despite the UK contingent not accepting that these type of cynical and cruel and divisive methods could be happening on their green and pleasant land, the global community noticed and began to question. What started out as the British royal family using the same playbook that had worked for centuries for closing down debate on some things, but creating distraction elsewhere to garner the attention, backfired big time. This particular royal family will go down in history as the one who weakened the foundation of the British monarchy and started the rot that will eventually bring the monarchy system to its end. There will be no UK monarchy in 20 years' time, and I personally believe it'll be gone in 10 or less years. So, what started out as another seek and destroy policy backfired, and in so doing created two global iconic figures, and one of whom is forever etched in all history books of merit as an icon who knew her worth, stood her ground, and continued to fight for the rights of those suffering by using her high profile and finances to uplift others. If you use the analogy of a set of scales, the higher Meghan and Harry were uplifted by good people, and the scope and depth of their philanthropic projects raising them high by the day, it proved how little the British royal family were doing, or had ever done. Nothing measurable, all smoke and mirrors, with a sycophantic media there to sell a sow's ear as a quality product. The scales started to fall on that side. Words written by others never sounded authentic, because the person reading them out did not really believe in what they were pushing. Everything was performative. And now those scales are like global scales of justice. And we will all start to hear about those on the side of the scale weight which is at rock bottom. As an additional note, this introduction is longer than usual because I wanted to explain the reason for this particular topic for this podcast. I do not generally give any attention or engagement to those societal groups other than pointing out that they exist and have power. The purpose of this podcast is to focus on two of those groups in particular, and how what they do day to day impacts the UK, particularly the vulnerable, and the powerful ones spotted an opportunity to play on the views of a growing section of opinion in the world about people of colour, and also the growth of nationalism of a certain type, and to use initially one person as their target to distract from other events running under the surface. What both of these groups we are focusing on today did not anticipate is that the lady entering their family had a global following on social media of over 1 million people. And within that following were very powerful people from a range of professions. All of those professionals and Meghan had a very high IQ, as well as experience in world affairs, and more than anything, Meghan knew her worth. Things that have made others in royal history bow and accept what was demanded of them did not work out how they expected in this era. Meghan was more intelligent than all the privileged family combined. They picked on the wrong person. Meghan was stronger than any of them will ever be. And even when they nearly broke her, when they found out that she had suicidal ideations, and the UK media and British royal family doubled down on their cruelty, she hung on and voiced her fears to her husband, Prince Harry. From that moment, history was about to be documented in a very different way than the abusers anticipated. I have told my view of their story over and over in these podcasts, but needless to say, the real dynamic duo was formed, and both groups have tried ever since to punish them for that. Whether it be denying them security, or removing finance without warning, imposing a 12-month transition period when the couple announced they were stepping back from royal duties, etc., only for the royal family to break that transition period that Meghan and Harry never wanted in the first place, and remove security, finance, and gave away their locations twice in the first 6 months of the transition period beginning. Here we are now, with the scales showing the British royal family at the base, where they can fall no lower. The treatment of their family members like this for the past 6 years is an indication of how they regard working class people in the UK and how they view people of colour anywhere in the world, including the UK. Just know, if Harry and Meghan were treated this way, understand how we are all regarded and would be treated without a second glance. Hence, we are taking a helicopter view of dysfunctionality in those two societal groups and the impact of their actions. Dysfunction in politics and in the UK royal family. Using a few extracts from reference sources listed at the end of the article, let's take a brief meander through those main elements. Regardless of size, all human groups are subject to the same dynamics. Factors that hamper a small group can also cause a much larger structure to falter. In business, managers and employees alike suffer when an organisation doesn't function optimally. No matter what size it is, when an organisation falls apart, it's usually from one or more of these 5 causes: misunderstood mission, lack of consensus on the nature of problems facing the team, misunderstood strategy, lack of team cohesion, lack of resources. A good leader will watch out for all of these potential showstoppers and work to prevent them or remedy them quickly. There is a section more detailed against each of those headings. It's probably about the size of A4, giving you examples in both government and monarchy groups in general, basically. I'm not going to go through all that now, but just know that there are details and examples given in the article. At the end of the extracts under those 5 headings, giving examples for both monarchy and royal family, I added my own note. And I've put, I would add here, if a team member feels ill-equipped to take on tasks that they have no training for, or the ability to take on such a topic, then the wider team as a whole needed to address that situation. As we have stated in these podcasts to date, emerging from a particular birth canal does not come with competencies and experience already. Privilege does not indicate other than privileged. Mistakes can be made, and because of the positions offered to people who come with privilege and not competence, when they make mistakes, a nation pays the price for it each time. Just the same as when things are done where the privileged become richer because of austerity in other areas of policy. There are vast numbers of people who suffer as a direct result of that group decision, and have no privilege to rectify their situation quickly. It can take years, and not all live to see better times. Another section in obviously the podcast, but also more detail in the article, Dysfunction of UK government for 12 years. Then there are some bullet points. File of failures, including 5 leaders in 12 years, and the implications for the UK. Everything is broken. 12 years of Conservative rule. And then the next section is an extract from LBC with James O'Brien, who sums it up brilliantly in a 3-minute video. I have put the link in the article. It'll show up on screen when you go online, but I've also put a few words in the article itself before you have the chance, if you don't have the time, to look at the video on YouTube. So, here's an extract from what James had to say. I do wonder how much 12 years of austerity, 12 years of utterly incompetent government has denuded the infrastructure that we need to cope with relatively predictable and ordinary crises or events, he said. James talked about how people on social media have been marvelling at the meteorological condition, saying the snow probably won't happen on Christmas Day, but enjoy it while it lasts. Do you know why it makes me think of gully suckers? He asked listeners. A gully sucker is a big engine, a machine, a vehicle that cleans gutters. It sucks the gullies, so it would routinely be deployed by councils to make sure that in the event of a deluge, then there wouldn't be as much disruption as possible, he said. Gully suckers have always stayed with me as a wonderful example of what happens when you make a decision based upon finances, and you make it without reference at all to reality, James continued. We've got to save some money on our annual budget. Let's get rid of the gully suckers, or let's get rid of the snowplows, he said, hinting at the cuts to public services since the Conservative government came to power in 2010. The section about dysfunction of the UK opposition party is so short it's embarrassing, but it's factual. Labour is the UK's lost opposition. Implications for the UK moving forward because of the above-mentioned dysfunction of the government as outlined, and the fact that the UK has no credible functioning opposition. This contributes to why the nation is experiencing lack of confidence in our government system and hopelessness about when the dire straits that many people are in will come to an end, or at least start to improve. Several links are given in the reference sources. Dysfunction of British royal family. The future is not bright. 70% of royal supporters are aged 65 years and over. Very small numbers of people in the age group of 40 to 65 want to see a royal family in the future. And more importantly, increasing numbers are not interested now. This does not bode well for the next in line. The 70% category of supporter want to see William and Catherine crowned in their lifetime because they feel, being younger, the British royal family will have a better chance of surviving. What they seem to forget is there are insufficient numbers now in the same age bracket as the Prince and Princess of Wales to give them sufficient support, and those in the 65-year and above age range will be reducing by natural causes. People below the age of 30 supporting the notion of a monarchy is very small indeed, and those under the age of 25 is in single figures. Added to all of the above, the next in line and wife are not competent for the changing role of monarchy, and they do the least percentage of engagements than the other 7 working royals, all of whom are in their senior years. Engagements of the smile, cut ribbon and take photos are diminishing fast, and the days of performative royal engagements are numbered. I do not anticipate this couple making any meaningful difference to the people of the UK. This is an extract from an article in The Guardian published in Australia in March 2021. Imagine being born into a silk straitjacket, then pushed upon a theatre stage. Your cord cut, you are now a permanent actor in Britain's public life. As an infant, your burbling will captivate a kingdom. At 12, it will be your grief. Millions will watch your little legs shuffle behind your mother's casket. The stage props include castles, horses and livery, but only the least imaginative could think that these things are automatically gratifying in exchange. You must smile about your captivity and genially submit yourself to a press that hacked your phone and helped kill your mother. The tabloids will describe their own behaviour as scrutiny. You will call it criminality. So will a jury examining your mother's death. So will the Leveson inquiry into media ethics. Regardless, you will hear scrutiny invoked to justify all sorts of things: stalking, hacking, gossip, and the fetishization of your wife's race. You don't belong to yourself, but a collective fantasy. When your wife is conscripted into the troop, against the advice of her friends, she too experiences the unrestrained intrusions of the tabloids. Then it's falsehoods and racism. She will become suicidal. When this happens, you will be reminded of your dead mother. You will become sick with anger, but asked by your family to remain polite, to keep that upper lip stiff. Restraint maintains mystique, and mystique, not transparency, is vital to continuing the absurdity of hereditary monarchy. Still, you ask for help, but none comes. Upon this stage, you have now become an ambassador for mental health, but you will have to gently describe your own grief, anger and depression with the same people that have a substantial budget for buying your private letters and the contents of your bin. You are captive to many things, including the demeaning relationship between press and palace. When your wife becomes pregnant, some of your family will anxiously speculate about the colour of your child's skin. Later, they will withdraw the Crown's security guards that protect your family, and while the media broadcast the location of your new home. Depending upon the tabloid's whims, you and your family are either actors in a national soap opera or a personification of the kingdom's imaginary unity and rectitude. Its long, cynical, hallucinatory nightmare. Who could have anticipated that Prince Harry's greatest rebellion, previously Hitler dress-ups and binge drinking, would be this heroic assertion of his and his wife's dignity and independence? Millions will now see Harry and Meghan as indulgent traitors, but after the Oprah interview, we might more accurately see them as historic whistleblowers. There is another section here, an extract from the same article from the Australian Reporter, talking about Prince Andrew. I'm not going to read all that out now. It's there for you to see in the article, but just to save time, really. Otherwise, it would be about an hour and a half, this podcast. So just so you know, there is section there about Andrew. The section about Prince Andrew and his involvement with Epstein ends with a few lines. Perhaps the Prince thought, this is about him talking with this is the BBC interview basically. So, perhaps the Prince thought his unctuous accent suggested integrity, but it resembled a man regurgitating toffee. Having failed to acknowledge the many victims of his friend Epstein, and haplessly exposing the morally infantilizing effects of his privilege, he announced that he would retreat from public duties. A dysfunctional family whose authority is inherited and conceived in medieval feuds, that is callous to its children, buries inconvenient truths, and relies for its survival upon an invisible contract with tabloids. It is a profoundly weird thing to hitch our cart to. Let's hail our unlikely whistleblowers, a prince who was first a husband and father, and a princess who preferred her freedom and health to the reputation of a cult that was indifferent to it. That's the end of that particular extract. As I said, it's very interesting, and it's coming, surprisingly enough, from Australia. So well worth a read, and as I said, the full article is in the reference source link at the end. All of the above that we've just discussed, briefly I said, more detail as usual in the article, has led to this, and there's an arrow and it points then to the next section of the article. And it's about austerity, Brexit, and the cost of living crisis. This extract is from an article from The Big Issue. And for those of you who don't know, The Big Issue is a newspaper, magazine type, where all the proceeds go to the homeless centres. And the people that sell The Big Issue are people who were formerly homeless, have now found accommodation with the help of those centres, and as part of that, they now sell this particular magazine. So this extract is from The Big Issue, so that you know that that's the background. People who are already in poverty and suffering, and it's relating to austerity, Brexit, COVID, and the cost of living crisis. The damage 12 years of Tory rule has done to the UK. Conservative power. It was written in July 2022. Conservative power defined by austerity, Brexit, the pandemic, and 3, now 4, onto our 5th Prime Minister, resignations has left Britain broken, and the poorest paying the price. With a tempestuous 3-year tenure marred by scandal, corruption, lies and U-turn, culminating in the rebellion of his own cabinet, it is easy to pin the country's current woes on its disgraced departing Prime Minister. Here they were talking about Boris Johnson and said it was July 2022. Though, as Labour MP Richard Burgon said, as he called for a general election, it wasn't one man that created record food bank use, ripped apart our public services, and handed out dodgy contracts to the super rich. Rather than one incompetent leader, 12 years of Tory rule has left Britain broken, with 1 in 5 citizens now living in poverty. Here's a look back at the damage the Conservative Party has wrought on working families across the country. Cameron's government initiated a harsh programme of austerity, which was sold as a necessary response to the financial crash. Tackling the budget deficit and national debt was the top priority, and the then Chancellor George Osborne implemented a string of cost-cutting measures in which everyday people bore the brunt. Housing benefit was reduced. Councils lost a third of their spending power. Child benefit was frozen, and family tax credits were amended to save the Treasury coffers. Public sector workers saw their pay frozen. Spending on public services, including the police, courts, schools, hospitals and prisons, was reduced, all while corporations' tax was cut, as a means, according to Osborne, to stimulate business activity and to balance the books. Warnings about the cruel policy were made at the time. The Institute for Fiscal Studies said the Chancellor's austerity programme would cause a 10% drop in family living standards. The study concluded that the strategy would result in rising child poverty and greater inequality. Welfare cuts and tax rises will act to reduce household incomes, and those with the lowest incomes are clearly set to lose the most from these reforms as a percentage of income, with the important exception of those with the very highest income. This is likely to increase poverty, other things being equal, offsetting some of the falls in poverty over the past decade. More than a decade after austerity was introduced, numerous studies show the exact social and economic consequences of the cuts. The National Health Service, for example, has suffered the leanest years in its history, leading to a rise in waiting lists and operation delays well before the pandemic. Describing the impact years of economic mismanagement has had on the National Health Service, Dr. John Puntis, co-chair of Keeper NHS Public, said, "The NHS is now facing its biggest crisis ever, with underfunding, 110,000 staff vacancies, bed cuts, ambulance services collapsing, record high waiting lists now over 6 million, and a massive maintenance backlog of around £9 million. With life expectancy stalled and poverty and inequality increasing, population health continues to suffer from the adverse effects of overall economic mismanagement." Research from Imperial College shows that life expectancy has fallen since 2010 in the poorest areas of Newcastle, Blackpool, Leeds, Liverpool and Manchester. The Sir Michael Marmot Review found that in 2020, largely due to the impact of cuts linked to the government's austerity policies, life expectancy has stalled for the first time in more than 100 years, and the gap in health inequalities has widened. In its True Cost of Austerity and Inequality UK case study, Oxfam notes how economic stagnation, the rising cost of living, cuts to social security, and public incomes and rising unemployment have combined to create a deeply damaging situation in which millions are struggling to make ends meet. End of their quote. According to this year's annual Living Standards audit from the Resolution Foundation, only Bulgaria is more unequal than the UK when it comes to income inequality. The Resolution Foundation and the London School of Economics' Big Brexit report says the long-lasting legacy of the UK's departure from the EU is likely to be slower wage and productivity growth over the next decade. Workers across most sectors and all regions should expect further real wage hits as the economy continues to adjust to Brexit, the report concludes. One of the biggest challenges facing households during the recent cost of living crisis is rising food prices. A recent report from the UK in a Changing Europe think tank found that the new trade barrier as a result of Brexit caused a 6% rise in food prices in Britain between the end of 2019 and September 2021, compared to 3 years before December 2019. With one of the highest COVID death tolls in Europe, the British Medical Journal said the UK's response to the pandemic was neither well prepared nor remotely adequate, being too little, too late, too flawed. The devastating impact of Tory austerity resurfaced during the pandemic, with years of spending cuts and deepening inequality meaning Britain was ill-prepared when a virus as deadly as COVID-19 struck. When asked why England had Europe's worst COVID figures, Michael Marmot, Professor of Epidemiology at University College London and Director of the UCL Institute of Health Equity, said, "The answer starts with austerity." Next section is headed, "Essentially, the monarchy is corrupt." It's a quote from Graham Smith, the CEO of Republic, an organisation that's mission is to end the monarchy and have someone who is accountable as head of state. Graham Smith, CEO of Republic, had this to say in an article listed in the reference sources. Smith and his colleagues regularly make freedom of information requests, commission research and publicise overlooked information about how the monarchy works, such as the fact that Prince Charles's private organisation, the Duchy of Cornwall, is exempt from corporation and capital gains tax, or that the 18 royals officially classed as working each cost the taxpayer an average of £19 million a year. And I will say here, that is taken from an article, but I will say it was done, I think it was last year. There are 7 officially working royals now, not 18. And where it refers to Prince Charles, clearly he's now the king, and the Duchy of Cornwall has now been handed over to Prince William. Yeah, I'll say no more about that, but it's now in Prince William's hands. Back to Graham Smith. We don't say that the fact that the monarchy is expensive is a reason to get rid of it. Smith cautions it's not. The fact that it's expensive is a symptom of the fact that it's unaccountable and secretive. It's really a way of pointing to the institution and saying, essentially, the monarchy is corrupt. I don't think it's going too far to say that. If corruption is the abuse of public office for personal gain, that is what the monarchy does, and it's routine and it's built into the system. End of quote. Republic would like an elected head of state similar to the one who serves the Republic of Ireland, where the role is largely ceremonial and apolitical, but the President can speak up at times of national crisis or uncertainty. Conclusions. In short, Harry and Meghan did the right thing by detaching from the role of senior working royals in the British royal family. Your mental health and general all-round health would have been severely impacted in the most negative of ways if you had remained. Unlike all the other members of that family, none of them had the experiences or the confidence or competence to even contemplate moving away from finance and housing from the monarchy. And more than anything else, none of the others had the confidence or the belief in valuing oneself and not to be reliant on others telling you what you are worth each day based on how high they want you to jump on a given day. Looking back, all the reasons given by so-called advisors who were really protecting their circle of comfort, which required an actual royal family with no real skills to be dependent upon the so-called specialists and government officials on loan to them, and the constant revolving doors between number 10 Downing Street and the palaces. Lazy, ineffective people, glad for the privilege, valued their worth by being part of that family, and not for any personal esteem based on one's own merits. Everything in that monarchy set up thought that they should be and were liked because of their privilege. And as long as not too many of the poor people suffered prolonged hardship, all was all right in their world. It was advantageous to the courtiers, etc., to be the ones who gave the impression of being the glue that held it all together, and for whom the British royal family could not function. That process worked when there were royal family members who never chose to develop an intellect or independent thought, and were contented to be robotic in their wave and cut ribbon lifestyle and call it work, in exchange for material things that they would never experience unless they actively sought a way to earn and achieve things that made a difference to people, not just oneself. Harry and Meghan, you are not cut from that mould, and you have aspirations to ease plights of as many people as possible, whilst ensuring that you and your children never have to experience being treated as less than by your own family, and a right-wing press using you for distraction from many heinous acts elsewhere in the family. You are no one's piñata. You are not slaves, even though your families treated you as such, going out of their way to make things difficult for you both, each family having their own agenda for the destruction that they tried to cause. You are not slaves, and the hunter and prey mentality and approaches were done to make you fold and return to the abuse or be destroyed. The family and their media created the hateful atmosphere and stoked the fire most days, and then stood back with their hands behind their backs, faking innocence. We know what went on, and now a global audience witnessed it too. And soon I am confident that the international lawmakers will too. I will go to my grave with that belief, and I will be proved right in my belief. Matters not whether I am here to see it. It will happen, and people involved in abusive activities across continents via their keyboards located on another continent will not escape justice, and neither will hiding behind a press badge. All the key ones will be made to answer for their activities against you and your children. Since 2016, government and monarchy have spent most of their time on self-serving activities, or encouraging others to hunt you down like prey, like runaway slaves. Very little of their time, if any, was spent on looking after the health of the nation. And for that alone, there needs to be a rethink about the methodology followed between monarchy and government. Your global support network are more than proud of you. Continue doing what you are doing. You are being forces for change on a global basis. We are preparing to celebrate 2 very important birthdays coming up in a couple of months. No other dates are as important. Lots of virtual and actual cookouts will be happening around the globe. Both of you should feel very proud of what you have achieved in such a short space of time. Only your respective families thought the outcome would be different, which proves you did the right thing, as stated in your announcement on the 8th of January 2020. We ride with you every day. That's the end of this week's podcast. Speak to you all as normal in the comments throughout the next coming week. So, it's bye from me. Bye from Ivy. Bye.